because this show we tackle ancient mysteries, the paranormal, UFOs, conspiracies, and when I look at the conspiratorial aspect, these same people in DC, they were behind things like 9/11, JFK, and just
Right.
even some of them with sex trafficking or child
I
trafficking.
know. I
So
know. Like,
so
and
what so why do I want to trust? I'm not
I think
saying
trafficking and UFOs is related.
Grush seems cool, but
All I know is this:
I don't know if I trust him though. I don't know if I trust
I
him.
don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody. The worst case scenario is that they're managing disclosure in order to frighten us into a new world order government. There are a lot of people my age and older, right, in those groups. I'm 56. So if the aliens, whatever they are, or whoever's in charge of this whole, whatever this is we're experiencing, if they knew of some timeline, right, like something in the future they were planning for, and they started working with us as children, right? A lot of us are at this age right now. We're between like 50 and 70-ish, right? We're at an age of authority in society, right? So if they knew whatever was coming down the pike had a date on it, and they needed to prepare a certain percentage of the population to be activated or useful in the future, for good or ill, I'm just saying. It certainly seems like people my age, are at that age right now where we would be taken seriously in the conversation. So I think if they knew it was later down the line, they would have started with another generation of people. I don't think they'd waste their time on my generation. So, well, again, I don't know how trustworthy hypnosis is, okay? I don't know. All I know is the quality of that memory was different. I felt drugged. I had no gateway, light beam and all that stuff. And I was so angry. I was terrified because I came out of it with this paranoia that was different than the alien fear. It was like a paranoia of, oh my God, if this is real, like what the hell else has happened to me that I don't remember? Well, there's been an anti-human narrative put in place over the last few decades by these bad guys, right? Where they're trying to indoctrinate all the kids into thinking humans are bad, right? Humans are a parasite on the earth. And so all these kids these days are coming out, they're totally mental, right? They feel like humanity's horrible. They never want to have children. So it's a depopulation agenda that they're psychologically programming into these kids, right? They're having them question their gender, right? They're having them self-castrate and sterilize themselves from that agenda, right? So, I mean, it's just like, what the hell, right? So you've got all of these things conspiring to encourage euthanasia, abortion, self-sterilization, and then meanwhile, the public is sicker than they've ever been from all of the poisoning in the food and the air and the water and everything else, right? So, I mean, you look at people on the beach in the 1970s and everybody looked great. And now you look at people and, there's all these health problems and obesity problems. And it's just, we have an enemy, and the enemy has been at work on like, super mode.
Welcome to Beyond the Forbidden. Today on the show, I got Camille Harman. You might know the name, maybe. I just interviewed her husband last year. Really good interview. And I've been wanting to get her on the show for a while, but things just didn't really line up right. But I think everything's lining up right now. And she is from my home state of Louisiana. I think it's been a long time since I've interviewed anybody from Louisiana. Last time I think was Lloyd Pye from the Star Child, with his research in the Star Child skull, which was before he died in 2013. But Camille Harman, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
So,
I met Lloyd Pye
oh, you
years
did?
ago. I think it was at Roswell, and in 1997, I believe. is when I met him. And he let me touch the actual skull. Like he had a replica skull and then he had the real skull and he let me touch the real skull. So that was very
Wow.
rare.
When I interviewed him, I think it was 2010. And before I say anything else, my biggest regret, probably one of my biggest regrets in life, especially with podcasts, excuse me, but 2010 is when I interviewed him. And when I started doing podcasts, I did it on Blog Talk Radio. It was on my old show, Cryptic Knowledge Radio. That was the origins of what years later would be Beyond the Forbidden. So out of about 50 interviews that I did, or 60, something like that, when I started in 2010, all those podcasts that were housed on Blog Talk Radio, I didn't back them up. I didn't save them. So out of those 50 or 60, I think I have about maybe 15. So I don't have Lloyd Pies anymore. I've contacted them. I told them I can't get into my account anymore. And also, how come? Because I lost passwords, emails, been through. That was before me and my wife now, and a bad relationship during that time. I was still military, just a lot of things going on, 09, 10, and 11. So lost password. I don't even know the email. I think I know the email, but they can't get me in some reason. And they said that if I could remember the password or the username or something like that, I would have to pay them to be able to get my podcast back. So they can still possibly get it, what they said, but I don't know. I gotta do some digging because I still have my laptop from back in the day. Maybe it's on there somewhere. I have no idea. I don't know. That's one of my biggest regrets. I have Jesse Marcel Jr. That interview. I have several others, like 15 or so interviews that I did download, fortunately, but I've got another 40 that I didn't save. And that one of them is Lloyd Pye. But when I interviewed him, he was, I think, in Baton Rouge, and he was willing to meet up with me and show me the Star Child, the skull. And I don't know what happened. That was, like I said, I was in the military then, but shortly after that, we lost him, 2012 or 13. I think he had cancer, but yeah, him and a lot of people we miss in this field, but it's a sad thing, but we just got to keep trucking forward, Camille.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, it's been a long time. I've been in this a long time too, like you, and so many people have passed away. It's pretty wild when you think about, like, I was looking back at the 1997 Roswell conference that I went to, and so many of those people are gone that were the headline speakers. Yeah.
Did you ever meet Dr. Carla Turner?
No.
I think she died in 94. I think your experience started in what, 95?
Late 95, right.
So before we get into that, who were some of the big inspirational people, I guess? And I guess I don't know if awakening is the right word, but in your knowledge and your expansion of awareness in this field and help you, along the ropes, like who would you say are a few people that helped you along the way with your journey?
Dr. John Mack was very influential to me.
Did you meet him or?
I met him a couple of times.
Wow.
I even made him angry once. I'm so embarrassed. Oh, yes.
Who else would you say?
There's so many. For me, it was really specifically the people talking about abduction.
Bud Hopkins and
I'm not into nuts and bolts. That's just not my thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs. He's still around.
Yeah.
And Daryl Sims. Just people really looking hard into abduction and the evidence for abduction.
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode, members will also receive a private link of the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers, behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else, and that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5. I interviewed Daryl Sims not too long ago, and then I interviewed him last year, and then I interviewed him in person at the Houston Skydancer UFO conference in 2018 or 19. But he has something. His belief is that aliens. I think he's referring to all of them, or maybe just the grays. Aliens are made, hatched, and cloned. Aliens are made, hatched, and manufactured, cloned for the purpose.
That makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
see, as we will get into, I have heard it all, right? I have a journalist brain because I wrote for UFO magazine for 5 years. And I listen to everything. I also have Mercury in Libra, which is an astrological thing. My husband's an astrologer, right? So he's got an answer for everything astrological. It's very interesting, actually. And so the way my brain works, Mercury is your brain and Libra is the scales, right? So I weigh everything, but I have a very hard time deciding. So I'm like, okay, I can hold a lot of different beliefs about this that do not mesh, and I can still hold those and just wait, you know? As I joke with Jeff all the time when we argue about things, I say, we'll find out when we die. Just leave me alone. Quit arguing.
Would you want to know that though? I don't know if I would want to know when I die. I don't know.
Like, what's the truth about aliens?
No,
I
no,
want
no,
to
no,
know.
no, 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 no. No,
No, I don't
like,
mean know when I'm gonna die. I mean we'll
yeah.
find all the answers when we die, hopefully. That's
Oh,
what
what if Jeff or anybody else could tell you, like, they seemed very credible. They could probably tell when, probably not to the day, but maybe the year.
Yeah, Jeff
Would you
can do that actually. I mean,
would
Jeff,
would
there
you want
are
to know though? Would you want to know,
well, I
or do you
wouldn't want
kind
to
of know?
know. I wouldn't want
I
to
don't
know.
want to know.
But I do like that movie Big Fish about the guy who knows when he's going to die, and so he lives his life.
Yeah.
But Jeff does have. There are astrological configurations that indicate death, and you know, it's just astrology is all about you see what you're looking at, right? So if you have the hours of time it takes to look forward in time, you know, you can find those configurations. Obviously, it's much easier to see when a client dies. He looks at their chart and goes, "Oh yeah, well they had this and this." So there are things that he can, you know, definitively say are indicators of death.
Well, what's crazy is that I was born 322. And we're about to get into you, but just warming things up here in a moment. But I was born 322 and it's March 22nd. And I've always had a fascination with the 22. And I would see 1122 a lot. I would see in the X Files, like that. That's my favorite TV show of all time. And so I would see it. I don't know. I just don't know why I would spot things out. Like Scully, when she'd wake up, or Mulder, it'd be like in the middle of the night, it'd be like 122, 222. And a lot of that was actually the episodes. Whenever you see like certain clocks, I found that out. That was the episode number. But it's anyways, I would spot these 22 numbers, and a lot of times, for a lot, I would see 1122. And then 112263 was JFK's murder. And that was one of my things waking up in the 90s. My pawpaw, you know, he's the one that got me into UFOs. He was a Pan Am American pilot back in the day. He was born in 1917. He's the one that got me into UFOs, aliens, and small little conspiracies and stuff. But anyways, so fast forward after seeing 1122 and 22s. So me and my wife, we got married 2013. And so anyways, our daughter was born November 23rd of last year. It was almost 11. It should have been 1122, but it wasn't. Some reason it got pushed to 1123, but there's still the 11 and 22, November of 2022. I don't know. You know,
I know. I'm into numbers too. So Jeff and I met on August 22nd, 2018. I mean, I'm sorry, 1998. I remember the 8, 1998. And we married exactly 3 years later to the day, August 22nd, 2001. And we didn't know that. Like, I found that out later.
Wow.
Which is weird.
That it's crazy. But anyways, um, so I know a little bit about you. Um, so we're always going to have people out there like, who is Camille Harman? So, I guess explain it all, kind of where you're from. Of course, I just
Okay.
said this, the great, well, I don't know if it's so great, the state of Louisiana. If I could move, I would. But we have too many family members here, and now that we have eight month old child, we're not moving anywhere. But anyway, so yeah, just kind of however long you want.
All right.
Explain to the audience a little bit about you and your acting career and just everything. 1995, and what would just lay the groundwork from there.
Well, let's see. So I was born in Louisiana in Shreveport in 1966. And I was adopted by my aunt. My parents were teenagers, so their marriage didn't last. I was adopted by my aunt, but before that, I went to live with my uncle in Huntsville, Alabama for a little while when I was a toddler. I'd say from about 2 to 3, something in that time range. And he was married and had his kids, my cousins, and I lived with them for a while. And now that I look back, sometimes I wonder if he worked for NASA, okay? And my cousin works for NASA too now. And I often wonder, did I get put in some kind of program because I lived with my uncle when I was a little girl and maybe I went to the doctor on the base? I mean, these are the kind of thoughts that you have when you have the alien experience. You're always going, why me? Why
Mm-hmm.
me? Why me? What are the factors? And he worked directly under Werner von Braun.
Wow.
He was a mechanical engineer. He worked on the Saturn V rocket and all these other programs, including the tethered satellite. Do you remember that thing that broke off and all the UFOs swarmed it?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my uncle. He passed away a couple years ago due to COVID, but
Wow.
um, yeah, he had quite the career. And when he retired, he took me out to dinner here. He used to work at Rocketdyne too, out in LA, where I live, and he took me to dinner when he retired. He came out here and then he retired, and I said, so what was it like to be a rocket scientist all those years? That's so wild. Because I'd already interrogated him about UFOs and he wouldn't tell me anything. He said, if it's true, it's NSA and they're never going to tell you and you just need to get over it. I was like, oh, thanks a lot. But when I asked him about his career, he actually said, I still wish I had been a doctor. And that blew my mind. I was like, what? And he said, oh, yeah, I wanted to be a doctor. But, my dad, your grandfather, was a doctor. And he said, absolutely not. It's too hard. You're going to go to what you call an engineering school. And back then, the parents dictated what the kid majored in, right?
Yeah.
So that was his path. But interesting. So anyway, I grew up with my aunt and her kid, and then my sister was born in New Orleans and then Lafayette. So most of my life I spent in Lafayette. I had a great time growing up in Lafayette. It was awesome. And I went to
Great food.
USL.
Awesome
Yeah.
food down there. Yeah. That
Yeah, I
that's
went to
where
USL.
that's
Yeah.
where me and my wife did our in vitro. We had to travel North Louisiana
Oh.
all the way to Lafayette for the in vitro process. But sorry, go ahead.
So I went to school in Lafayette. I started acting in community theater when I was in college. I wasn't studying theater then. I just started acting then at the end. And then I moved to Virginia, to Richmond for a while, and started acting professionally there. And then I decided to go back to grad school and get a master's in theater. So I went back to New Orleans because they offered me an assistantship at the University of New Orleans, and I got my MFA there. And it was so fun because it was the kind of school where they let you work like in your career. So they were encouraging us to have an agent. And if we got a booking, because there's a lot of filming in New Orleans, to like skip class and go do the job and get some credits. So that was really nice of them. And I had all these credits and my SAG card and everything by the time I graduated. And so I graduated in 94 and I was doing really well there in theater, in film and television and stuff. And my boyfriend was an actor there too. And we did Richard III in a park, in City Park on the Peristyle, which is this beautiful colonnade outdoors next to a a lagoon. And it
Wow.
was so epic because we're doing Shakespeare in the park outdoors. We had a horse on stage. It was amazing. Anyway, he was Richard and I was Lady Anne. And then we felt like we were hot stuff and we were going to go to LA. So we moved to LA that fall of 1995, actually. In 1995, we moved to LA. And that's when my whole alien thing kicked in, like super high gear. So we got to LA and it was like September 95. And we had everything going for us. Like I had an agent, I had a day job. We had this cool house with this great view in Silverlake neighborhood of Los Angeles. We had all these friends from his college, and you know, we were like set up. We were very positive about our lives. And you know, then what happened is I started having all this anxiety and these weird physical symptoms in my body. And I noticed that I didn't have any menstrual cycle for like a few months in a row since getting to LA. And then in December, I have to back up because right before we moved, I had been working in the French Quarter at this gallery, and I walked over to this bookstore on my lunch break, and I felt compelled to buy this Whitley Strieber book, Breakthrough, which just jumped out at me, the face, you know, and the whole thing. And I was like, vaguely familiar with Communion. I had seen the movie, and I said, "Oh, that guy, he's still writing about aliens? Like, I wonder what he thinks now." Because I had never read his earlier books. I had just seen the movie Communion. So I bought that book and I read it, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is incredible. This is the most important thing on the planet." So that really woke me up, like in August before we moved. So anyway, we moved. I'm having all these weird symptoms, and then we were walking the dog one day in December, and we saw this UFO because the dog was barking at a squirrel that had run up a tree, and we look up and there's this like black thing in the sky in broad daylight sitting there with this shimmer around it. And I can't even tell you what shape it was. I think it was a triangle, but it was so high it was really hard to tell with that shimmer around it. And I remember you know, we're looking at it, and then we looked at each other, and I said, you know, and he was like, "You and those books, you know, you've been reading about UFOs and now we're seeing one." I was like, and we looked back and it was gone. So it was there sitting still, and then it was gone. And I was like, "That's it, take the leash, I'm running home." So I ran home, and I looked in the phone book, and they had a number for MUFON, and I called MUFON and I reported it. And they said, you know, "We have these monthly meetings if you want to come." And I was like, "Oh, I'm there." So I started going to their meetings in Burbank at the time in 1995. And I saw this presentation by, still in December, sorry, before the meeting, right around the time we saw The Craft. I had this attack of sleep paralysis at night, and it happened twice in one night. And I had had it before in my life, but this particular night was really weird because while I had it, and Eric was in the other room watching a David Lynch movie that I didn't want to watch, and I was asleep, and I heard this voice say my name in my left ear by the bedside, and it sounded very mechanical. Like it was totally freaky because I'm in this state of paralysis and I hear Camille, you know, and I'm like, and then I had this image of a gun in my face. Very, very disturbing, right? So I've never had sleep paralysis where I had any association with an audio effect or a visual. So I was like, what the hell? I mean, that scared the hell out of me. And then he came to bed, and then it happened again the same night. And you know, you come out of it and you're like moaning and you can't move, but when you're so afraid, and when you finally can move, sometimes it comes out of your throat, like, you know, like, you know, like that. And he woke up and he was like, "Oh my God," and I'm crying, and it was really traumatic. So
Can I read you some stats on the sleep paralysis real fast?
yes.
So I've read this once or twice. I think once was with Christy Peterson that you said you watched. I think I read it. So on the National Institute of Health, NIH, not sure what year. So it may be a little different now. I don't know. Quote, "Sleep paralysis is a common condition that affects approximately 7.6% of the general population during their lifetime. The episodes happen either during sleep onset or offset until gross motor paralysis coupled with full consciousness of the situation," end quote. So with that 7.6% of the population, that makes about 25.2 million people out of 332 million people here in the United States. So I guess I think with that large chunk of that 25.2 million people who are experiencing sleep paralysis, I would say a large chunk of that 25.2 million people are having some type of UFO, ET encounter, abduction, or something. I think it needs to be studied more. I mentioned that on other shows. Sleep paralysis needs to be examined and studied more. I don't see enough of it out there.
I'll give you an interesting bit of trivia. I later on, flash
Okay.
forward a year or so, I was going to Bashar channelings. Have you heard of Bashar? Daryl Anka, who channels this entity, Bashar, who claims to be an alien.
Yes. Yes, I have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was going to those meetings in LA, and um, he said that sleep paralysis is the doorway sensation of when you're shifting dimensions.
I can see that.
That
Yeah.
was interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, fast forward a little bit to like now we're in early 20, I mean, I keep saying 20, I'm sorry, early 1996. And, you know, I'm going to the MUFON meetings, and Kim Carlsberg speaks, and she has a book out about her abductions. And Daryl Anka did the illustrations, right? The guy who channels Bashar is an artist. He makes miniatures for the sci-fi shows
Hmm.
of spaceships and stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, he did the illustrations of her incredible book, which is called Beyond My Wildest Dreams. And Kim was a set photographer for Baywatch at the time, the show, and she was living with, I think, the director or the producer of Baywatch in a house in Malibu on the beach. And she was having these horrible abduction experiences. Um, so her presentation blew me away. And I went to look at her book on the table. And in the back of the book, it had a checklist like you might have been abducted if this is all going on in your life. And I was scanning that, I was like, holy crap, I have like 85% of these things in this book. And by the way, in January that year, before I saw Kim, my menstrual cycle had magically returned, and so I had like no menstrual cycle for 3 months or so, and then it just came back and everything was good. So I had this feeling like I was like shaking in the back of the room, and I just knew. I was like, oh my God, I think I'm one of these people. I just knew it. And so Barbara Lamb was there that night, and I was introduced to Barbara, who does regressions, right? And I said,
Hmm.
I think I need to have a session with you and target this night in December when I had the sleep paralysis attack. And, so we scheduled that, and I did my regression with her in, I think it was April. I think it was April 96, first regression. Oh my goodness. So I have this memory. First, we targeted another event in Virginia years before when I had a very weird satanic dream. And so full disclosure, I'll tell you that one. So in the dream years ago, I was sleeping at this dorm. I was supervising some students in a playwriting competition that were housed in a dorm, and I was like a chaperone. So I was sleeping in this dorm in Virginia, and I had this dream. I was with a film crew walking through a mansion belonging to a rock star. Now, this was not any rock star I knew, just like a made up dream world rock star, like a long haired heavy metal type looking guy. And we're going through his house, and he's saying, this is my this room, this is my that room. And he gets to this one room, he goes, this is my satanic ritual room. And I'm like, and they keep walking, and I'm standing in the doorway of this room, and it's got like an altar and scary stuff and a goat head on the wall. And I stood in this door and I said, I dare you to make yourself known to me. Like in my dream, this is what I said. And then the goat head came alive. This is so weird, but it was so scary. So this goat head came alive, and it starts going like a goat noise, right? And as soon as that happened, I had this attack sensation. I felt like somebody had stuck a vacuum cleaner into my solar plexus and was sucking my soul out of me, and I was going to disappear into the void. Like it was the most extreme astral panic attack, something, right? And I said in my dream, stop in the name of Jesus Christ. And it stopped like that. And then I woke up and I heard wind chimes. And I was like, what just happened? So actually, when I went to Barbara, that was the first thing we targeted in the regression. And I had a memory of these.
What year was this, your first regression?
1996.
Okay.
So I had a memory of being in this dorm room, and there were beings, I can only see their eyes, but they had like vertical slit eyes, and there was a tube in my solar plexus, like they were trying to suck something out of me. That's what I remember. So then we skipped to the next target. We did 2 targets in one session. The next target was this weird night in December when I had the sleep paralysis. So we go to that night, and I remembered being in my room, and there were lights, and then they were different colors, but then they turned into a blue light, like a very turquoisey blue. And I felt like I was hit by this light and folded up into a fetal position. And then I rose through the ceiling in this fetal position. That's how I remembered it. And I was screaming. And then I unfolded, and I was now in a white misty room, and I was on a table, and I was in utter terror, and I was still paralyzed, and I couldn't move. So I can't say there was a ship. All I know is I had this blue beam, this light, the going up sensation, and then I'm in this other place, unfolded, flat. So I'm screaming. Everybody's looking at me. Everybody's looking at me. I'm like terrified. And Barbara's like, who's looking at you? I said, I don't know. She said, well, look around. She had to command me to like look around. So I look over here, and there's a row of beings to my left. Like, I don't know how many, like 4 or 5, I don't know. They were very tall. They had white robes on with a high collar like this, like a, they had long skinny arms. They had the big white heads. They had the black eyes. And they're kind of indistinguished. They're kind of like not super delineated. Like they might have been partially materialized, or in my memory, they were kind of misty. So yeah. And then she said, what do they want? Or something like that. And the message I got was, well, they were saying, relax, relax, relax. And then I said, I have a baby and they want it. Right. And I'm screaming. And then a being I couldn't see for some reason, I was blocked, was at my feet. Right. And my knees went apart, and no one was touching them in my recollection. And I really started panicking. And she said, you can go above your body and remember it watching from above. And so I like, poof, and I'm watching it. And even though I couldn't see this being, I did see a flash of an instrument. It was like a scary speculum looking thing that was like kind of like an egg whisk. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It had metal slats, but it could crank open. And I just, and then the thing puts this in me, takes out this little tiny something, and I see through the slats like this. I don't know what it was. I don't know, because I didn't see it other than through the slats. It was pink, and it was small, and it was mine. And it was, I can't tell you if it looked like half alien, half human. I don't know what it was. And this being walked out of the room with it, and I just lost it. I was like, they didn't even let me see it. I was horribly bereft. And at that time in my life, I had never been pregnant that I knew of. I had never had an abortion. I had no experience at all with babies. I was actually terrified of babies, to be honest. Like, I was afraid to babysit. I was afraid to hold babies. I didn't have an aversion to them, but I had I was not comfortable with babies, and I would have dreams about giving birth in a bathtub and it was a puppy. I would have these weird dreams. So God only knows. God only knows what my history is, regarding that, if that's happened more than once or whatever. So it was very disturbing. And that was the end of the session. That was enough, right? So Barbara gives me my little cassette tape and I go home and I play it for my boyfriend. And he's like, oh God, like, oh.
This was your first session.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my boyfriend was like, you could see it was a paradigm shift for both of us, right? Because he didn't know what to believe. And you could just see his face like, oh my God, my girlfriend is never going to be this ever. Like, what's this going to do to us? And as time unfolded, I was so obsessed. I would talk about it at parties and stuff. And he was just mortified, right? He was like, why can't you keep this to yourself? Like, what is wrong with you? You are like a born again Christian, but worse. And which was ironic because later I became a born again Christian. So cut forward.
Well. First off,
Okay.
with that first regression,
Yeah.
And please don't let you lose your frame of thought where you're about to go with that. But with your first regression and how you're having all these downloads, or you're remembering things that's happened to you with Barbara Lamb's help with the regression. After that, what was your frame of mind? Like, can you explain a little bit more? Was it good feelings and thoughts? Was it a little bit of fear, like confusion? Explain
Yeah.
more of the emotional aspect of that.
It was wonder and fear. It wasn't anger. It was amazement, fear. The next thing that happened shortly after, my boyfriend went out of town to film something back in New Orleans. So I was sleeping alone for a week. And I woke up at 3 mornings in a row with the alarm clock saying 400 exactly. And I was like, I didn't hear a noise. Why am I awake? What is going on? 3 nights in a row, 400. And the third morning I woke up and I was going to shave because I was meeting my friend at the beach. And I looked down and I have this not bleeding, but like freshly scabbed red pinpricks in a triangle on my calf. And I was like, I know that's some alien thing. I've seen it. I've seen it in a video or somewhere. And so I had started recording shows like, on the Learning Channel. Remember the Learning Channel? They had all these great
Mm-hmm.
And I found in a book, actually, a picture of someone who had that. And I was like, I knew it. And I've since then met many people who've had that. So I went to get another regression, right? And this time I went to Yvonne Smith just because she was the other expert in that field. And I just was curious. I was like, well, Barbara's great, but I want to go to the other lady that does this in my area just to experiment. So I went to Yvonne and we did the regression targeting the triangle thing. So in that memory, I didn't go through the ceiling. I went out the window, and which I thought was weird because it was just a variation. And so I got the window and I remember the feeling of going through the window glass. It was like, I knew it was something different, but it didn't feel that big a deal. Like it was like, I say it's like sticking your hand in a bucket of room temperature water. Like you could feel a difference, but not that much. And so this time I had beings around me, 3 little ones with wrinkly heads. They had like brown wrinkly heads. And they're on 3 sides of me. And then down by my feet on the right-hand side was this tall white one again, the big, tall gray with the wraparound eyes, the high collar robe, right? Long fingers. I remember being fixated by the fingers and saying how beautiful they were, like an Albrecht Dürer painting that I saw in art history class. That's what I was like obsessed with those hands. And
How
And
many
this,
fingers? How many fingers was it?
they seem to be like the normal amount of fingers. I didn't notice a different count, actually. Um, anyway, this creature uh, was dealing with some kind of a rack of instruments on the ceiling, and he pulled down this wand thing that was connected to a like a tube or a cord, and then a tip, and then put the tip on the wand and just popped it in my leg real quick. And I don't know what it was. I didn't ask them. I didn't get any information. The interesting thing that came out of that session was I was screaming at the little aliens, or whatever they are, because I still don't know if they're aliens. Just saying. I was screaming at the little ones because I said, "You make me afraid of little kids, but you're not a little kid." And the reason I said that, I was a substitute teacher at the time. We actors do many weird jobs, right? I had so many jobs. I was a faux finisher. I did catering. I did substitute teaching, and I
Just
had
so
this.
everybody knows, she played in the movie with Christian Bale, Vice. So
Yeah, later I was in an
yeah,
Oscar-winning film,
yeah.
which is really cool.
Anyways,
Um, I'd had this experience with a bunch of third graders one day. And it was this class where the teacher didn't know she'd be out and she left no lesson plan. And I didn't know what to do. And I was coming up with a plan. And the kids barely spoke English. That was another problem. And so I was going to have them do a drawing project for a while I got my act together. And the kids, they surrounded me and they said, "Teacher, we know where the paper is. Follow us to this cabinet." And they started pulling my arms toward this cabinet to get the paper. And my whole body went into like, oh, like I remembered being like pulled by little somethings, grabbing my arms. And it just gave me like a cellular memory of this, it was like deja vu. And I held it together. I mean, I didn't freak out in class, but I just went like I noticed it. So anyway, when the little beings were around me and I was yelling at them, "You make me afraid of little kids because you look like little kids, but you're not little kids." And I'm screaming and cussing. One of them put its hand on my forehead and I was like, "Get your hand off me, you little bastard." But as soon as it put its hand on my forehead, I like all my anger melted away. So it was able to calm me by putting its hand on my forehead, which was interesting. I later met somebody who had that same experience too. So
not
that
Drew
was that.
Bledsoe, huh?
No, it wasn't Bledsoe, but I met him later. I love Chris Bledsoe.
I interviewed him a few months back, but yeah, good story.
Yeah. So anyway, those are the big two, and then there
Did I
were
say
more.
Drew Bledsoe? I meant Chris Bledsoe.
Chris Bledsoe. Yeah.
Drew Bledsoe was was a quarterback for the
Oh,
Patriots back in the
oh,
day.
really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're at such the beginning of my story. I guess I'm talking too much. Let me try to get through
No,
some more.
I'm here all the time. This show's about you. So
Well, I got really, I went really down the rabbit hole. Obviously, I got obsessed, right? I was obsessed. Like acting, I didn't care. I mean, I cared, but I didn't care really. And I remember going to an audition for Star Trek actually at Paramount. And the casting director, I'm in there and I'm like, if someone was abducted by aliens, would that give them a better chance of being cast? And he just looked at me like, "I don't know." And I was like, "Okay." Like, I can't even believe I said that. I can't even. But anyway, I'm all out of the closet now, so who cares? Um, I mean, I've always been out of the closet about it because I can't help it anyway. So I started.
without losing your frame of thought.
Yeah.
But I need to ask this because with you coming out of the closet and talking about all this, how has that affected your career in Hollywood? How did your friends and family think, and your colleagues think of you coming forward and sharing? Has it affected you in a negative way, positive way, or a neutral way? And
It's I may never know because the things you don't get that you audition for, they never tell you why. It's the most heartless business because you audition all the time, right? You spend hours preparing and doing these auditions and you only get them once in a while. You only get the job once in a while. So you never know, right? And I just figured the way the world is so crazy now with everyone waving their freak flag, right? I'm like, you know what? If I can't talk, do you know Fran Drescher, the head of SAG, the president of SAG, who's in charge of the strike right now, was abducted by aliens? You can read about it on the
You take
Huffington.
you
Google
talking
it.
about the writer's strike?
No, the SAG strike, the actor strike right now.
Yeah. Oh. So he was. I didn't know that.
Fran Drescher. Do you remember the actress who played the nanny on that show?
Yeah. Get out of here.
She's the
Really?
president of SAG.
Really?
She was abducted by aliens. You can Google it and you will read the whole story.
Can't wait to tell my wife that because
Yeah.
she will know all about that show. So,
So
anyways, I interrupted you while ago.
no,
So,
I just don't care. I don't care. I'm sorry. It's like saving my country. It's like, I don't care. My career, which is, not that awesome. It's okay. It's not as important to me as saving my country and talking about aliens. Like, seriously, I don't care. My husband pays the bills with astrology. So that's what it boils down
yeah,
to.
he's been pretty big in this he's been on all the major mainstream.
I told my manager and my agent, I said, I'm going to go back out and talk about aliens again because I feel the time is right. Is that going to bother you? And they're like, no, it might even help your career. I mean, I guess the way they see it is publicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you show up and do your work, I mean, there are all kinds of actors with crazy problems. They're drug addicts and, whatever. I mean, who knows? I've never been a drug addict. I've never been in jail. I've never done anything. I've always paid the bills and I'm a normal person. So, I can still show up for work. Anyway, but I started going to conferences. Like I saw David Icke early on in the mid 90s, right? And I can tell you, when I saw David Icke, I didn't know who he was, but I was volunteering at the Whole Life Expo. I think this was probably 1996 or 7. And I was sitting at this table and it was a mezzanine level. So he comes up the stairs and he walks over to the speaker table and starts talking to them. And I'm seeing this from a distance. And I swear, when this man came up the stairs, it was like the whole feeling of the room changed at this big hotel. And I just looked at him and it was like he came in with an invisible army. And he went over there to check in. And I was like, who is this guy? And I'm not super psychic. That's what was weird. I'm not one of these people who feels things all the time. So he left the table and I went over there and I said, who was that? And they were like, David Icke. He's giving a lecture. And I said, can I be the room monitor in there? And they said, sure. And they signed me up to be his room monitor. And that's when his book, And the Truth Shall Set You Free, had come out. So it was way back then. And I saw him speak and I was like, wow. And I was hooked on him.
Yep, I got that book right.
Yeah.
Right there. Yep.
Yeah. So I went to Bashar channelings. I was doing all this stuff, right? I was going to abduction support group meetings. I was meeting others. I was re-examining my childhood because my childhood had a lot of red flags, right? As far as possibly being an abductee since childhood. I had paranormal fears as a child. I had I had a fear of reptilian things. Like I was like really, really freaked out by the Sleestacks on the Land of the Lost show for kids that came on Saturday mornings. Mm-hmm. That show was trippy. It was about time travel, reptilians living underground, like high tech with crystals and all this weird stuff, right? And the creature from the Black Lagoon terrified me. So I often wonder, like, did I see some reptilians and I just don't remember that? I had a spot on my lung. I had a lot of weird childhood illnesses and respiratory things. I had nosebleeds really bad. I had to get my nose cauterized as a child. All these are like, yeah. And I had doctors x-ray my lungs and at Tulane. And there was a spot on my lung and they were like asking me about that. Like, do you smoke? And I'm like, no, because there's a spot on your lung showing up on the x-ray. Who knows? So I don't know. I just wonder. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. I went to Roswell. I met a bunch of people there. That was amazing. On the way back, I went with Don Waldrop, who was the head of MUFON LA, and we stopped at White Sands. And he was a photographer, amateur photographer, so he had a good camera. And he said, go run around in the sand dunes and I'm going to take some pictures of you. And I said, okay. So they were so beautiful. I don't know if you've ever been there, but these huge white sand dunes. So I'm running around and I drew this big alien face in the sand. He took all these pictures of me, and only in the pictures where I'm standing on this alien face yelling at the sky, I'm yelling at the sky, I dare you to come down here, right? In the pictures later that we develop, there's this light anomaly, like right where I'm looking in two of the pictures, this little squiggly light in the picture. Yeah. So that was weird. I also went to Sedona with my mom, and we had another thing where we were taking pictures, and then later that night when we downloaded them, we saw a UFO in the picture. So that was kind of cool. In 1998, I went to see the crop circles. I was obsessed with the crop circles, and it was an amazing trip. I mean, I was there partly with Barbara Lamb, and she took me to my first crop circle. I was obsessed with the singer Sting since I was like 15. And I went to his house, which is right near Stonehenge, which is where the crop circles mostly happen, is in Wiltshire County. And and then the first crop circle she took me to was called the Stingray. What are the odds of that? What are the odds? She picks me up and she's like, we're going to go see your first crop circle. It just appeared last night. And we get there and it's kind of drizzly and it's this big thing called the Stingray. Yeah.
You was with Barbara Lamb?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was really trippy. And, but I had a fling. I met this guy, crop circle guy, English guy, and we had a fling. And I was like engaged to my boyfriend at this time. Okay. Back in LA. And I went home and I was like, oh man, I had this fling. And we have to break up, obviously. And he said, I'm so glad you had a fling because I really wanted to break up with you, but I didn't want to be the bad guy. And I just can't take the UFO stuff. And we had this very amicable breakup, actually. And Jeff and I went to his wedding. And yeah, so it all worked out. But
I can just see Barbara Lamb over there. Like, where's Camille at? Well, I can't get a hold of Camille.
So, and then right after that, I had this bumper sticker on my car that said, I heart England, right? And I'm at the gas station in Malibu. I remember because I had been training as a MUFON field investigator in this class at the beach where they were training us to look at stuff and know what is not a UFO, right? Like, so we're at the beach watching stuff at night, like, okay, that's a this, that's a planet, that's a plane, that's a helicopter, that's a satellite. And then I had to get to town for this rehearsal. And I pulled over to get gas right next to the colony, the Malibu colony where Sting had a house. And I'm like gazing over the wall, pumping my gas, thinking about Sting, all right? And this guy's getting gas next to me on a motorcycle. And it was Jeff. And he said, what part of England do you love? And I was like, Wiltshire. I was just in Wiltshire looking at crop circles. And I thought, he's not going to know what I'm talking about. And he goes, oh, my friend Jim Delatoso showed me a video of UFOs making crop circles. What got you into UFOs? And I'm like, you know Jim Delatoso? And I was really impressed. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, they got into me. And he goes, oh, yeah, I had trouble with him in Wisconsin growing up. You know, I saw him all the time. And so we start talking at the gas station. And we go on.
Did he tell you, come on, baby, get on the back of my motorcycle. Let's go.
Almost. So, no, so we ended up, we talked for a while and then we swapped business cards, right? And then I called him later, right? And I said, like a month later, and I said, do you remember me from the gas station? And he said, yeah. And so we got together at his favorite cafe, the Earth Cafe. And he brought his laptop, right? And he types in my astrology on our first date, right? Because he's like, why go out with someone twice if they're weird or not compatible? So he checked me out. And I remember all the things he said about me. I was like, wow, this is serious. This is like heavy duty. So here we are. Yeah. So here we are. That was in 1998. And here we are married. We're having our anniversary next month. So for what, 22, 23 years, something like that. I better find out.
There's the 22 again. 22 or 23. It doesn't matter. My daughter was born on the 23rd, and we was just talking about the 22nd. It follows me. I'm telling you that those numbers just follow me. Anyways, go
Well,
ahead.
they're master numbers in numerology. 11, 22, and 33 are all master numbers. Yeah. So and now I had a boyfriend, or we got engaged and got married 3 years later. But I had someone who got me. It was really fun because we did things together that were, about spiritual exploration and stuff like that. So when we had a baby, we had my son, and when I was pregnant, here's the John Mack story. When I was pregnant with my son, oh my gosh, I had so much anxiety because first of all, I had horrible morning sickness, like to the point where I had to go to the hospital and get put on an IV. So I was just throwing up and feeling awful. And I called John Mack, and I had met him again at this party in Malibu, and I had questioned him about his funding from the Rockefellers. I was like, "Are you comfortable being funded by the Rockefellers?" Because I was in David Icke mindset, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you trust them with your data, like your information that you find out? And he got so upset with me at that meeting. Like, he was like, horrified that I'd asked that question. And I guess it was like a group, it was kind of like a fundraiser for him too. So I think it was just out of place for me. But my UFO magazine mind, that's how I was thinking. And later, so I called him and I said, Dr. Mack, I'm so freaked out being pregnant with my baby. It's my first baby. And it's making my alien pregnancy seem so much more real because it's just like this, right? And the nausea and all these things. And do you have any clients that I could talk to that are women that had the abduction experience, but also had a real baby in normal life that can relate to me? I just need to talk to some woman that's had that. And so he said, "Oh yeah, you're the asshole." And I was like, "Oh my god, no, not asshole." He didn't call me asshole. He called me smart ass. You're the smart ass. And I was like, oh, I was like mortified, because I thought he was like the greatest thing ever, but I had upset him that time. So
Well, it's almost like a badge of honor, I guess.
I was like, yes, I'm so sorry about that. He goes, yes, I have someone you could talk. And he set me up with this person to talk to who was really nice. So even though he was mad at me, he helped me. He was so sweet and kind. And anyway, that was that. So I had my son, everything worked out. I had to have a C-section, but other than that, it worked out. And then we moved to New Orleans. What am I saying? Because of New Orleans, because of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit, I was so traumatized watching that, right, at home in Beverly Hills in our apartment. I was like drinking red wine, watching the city flooded, and I was worried about earth changes, right? I'd seen the Gordon Michael Scallion maps and all these scary things. And I just told Jeff, you know what? I'm not acting. I'm just being a mom. And, you could do this astrology from anywhere. Let's get out of here. I don't feel safe here. Like, it's going to fall in the ocean. So we moved to Tucson. But that's why we moved to Tucson, because of Hurricane Katrina, of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved Tucson. We lived there for 10 years, and I hooked up with the MUFON community right away. They're very active. Tucson's a huge UFO town, as you can imagine, because it's got incredible skies. Wendell Stevens lived there.
Melinda Leslie, I think.
She's in Sedona.
Oh,
Right?
Sedona, yeah.
Becca Hardcastle Wright lives in Phoenix area. Jim Delatoso lived in Phoenix. Like Robert Dean lived there. Jim Nichols, the artist, lived there. All these really interesting people were on the scene in Arizona.
I interviewed Robert Dean also. That's one of the interviews I didn't get to save. Yeah, that's one of my, like I said earlier, that's one of my biggest regrets. But anyways, go ahead.
No, so it was a mecca for UFO stuff. So we had a great time living there, and lots of sightings, lots of adventures. But then I was writing my book. I don't have a book, just to let you know, but I started writing a book, and I got towards the end of the story, and I said, you know what? I still don't know what these beings are. I don't know. Like, is it mind control? Is it aliens? Oh, I forgot to tell another story that's so important. I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place.
No, go ahead.
I have to go back to LA. So 2 other big important things happened. So my dentist found this object in my tooth. I had gone to get all my fillings changed, and from the mercury ones to the white ones, and they were great, except for one was hurting me up here. And I went into him and I said, I love my new fillings, but this one hurts. Can you check it out? And he said, well, the seal is good. I don't know why it hurts. So just give it some time. I said, okay. So I came back later and it still hurt. And he said, well, I'll dig it out and I'll redo it. And I'll use a different brand. And I said, okay, we'll try that. So he dug it out. And he got to this point where he's like, he gets a mirror out for me. And he shows me, he says, you know, there's this hard, like spherical charcoal gray thing in your tooth, and I don't know what it is, and it wasn't there before. And I had told him like earlier, I said, you know, I'm actually an alien abductee, so if I freak out in the dentist chair, you know, not that I ever have before, but I've been reading that sometimes abductees have flashbacks and they get triggered.
Mm-hmm.
So he already had a heads up about me. And he was like, okay, I read a book about Roswell. All right, lady, you know, whatever. So, but then I said, you have to tell me if you ever find anything weird in my body. Now, isn't that weird that I told him that before when he did the fillings the first time? And so he finds this thing in my tooth and he's like, this wasn't there when I did your filling. I don't know what this is, but it's super hard and it's not your old filling. And he showed me in the mirror and he's like banging on it with this little pick. And he goes, what do you want me to do? I said, well, can you get a piece of it? And he's like, no, it's I'm grinding it. It's going down the drain in the water. And I said, well, just fill it up and I'll deal with it.
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else?
So anyway, he
becoming
did that,
a
and it
patron,
stopped turning.
a few things
so
you'll
whatever he
receive
did,
are
get out
the full-length 90-minute or
So you didn't get to
podcast
save
episodes.
So you didn't get to save whatever
will
that
also
was.
receive a private link of the video
'Cause he couldn't make a
podcast will only
chunk.
be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person,
Anyway,
face-to-face
flash forward,
interviews
so
with some of the
I
most
go get a
well-known,
regression
respected
to that. I'm like,
researchers.
ooh, that's very
Behind the
curious,
scenes
right? So I
footage
go
of
get a
interviews not
regression
seen anywhere
with
else.
Barbara Lamb again.
And that's just a few perks.
And this
So what do you
time I
have to
came
lose?
to,
Cut out
there was
one
no light and
brain-rotting
all that.
overly
I came
processed
to,
half a mil a
in
month
memory,
that doesn't do anything
on a
beneficial
gurney
for your
in
mind,
an
body,
exam room.
and spirit.
Now this
and become
wasn't a misty
Patreon
room with
for
aliens.
just
This was like a
$5.
regular exam room with cabinets and a door, right? And